Kia ora and welcome to HR Chats with me, Radar, where we chat all things HR. Today, what are we chatting, Radar? Well, we are talking organisational culture. What is it and why should we care? And no one better to ask than Lynda Carroll. Lynda is the founder and CEO of Align Group with nearly 30 years of experience in assisting organisations to align strategy, culture, governance, and performance here and abroad. Lynda has led mergers and acquisitions, established new organisations such as a Crown entity, and prior to establishing Align Group, she was a Tier 2 General Manager, People and Culture for a variety of organisations. She regularly presents webinars and face-to-face governance development programs. She facilitates strategy and foresight workshops, incorporating the identification of risk, opportunities, and values. And she's a chartered fellow of the Institute of Directors and an accredited foresight practitioner through the Institute of the Future in California. Hello, Lynda.
Hello. Sorry, that was a bit of a
That's a
mouthful, wasn't it?
you've got a lot going on, and I'm fascinated. Ooh, an accredited foresight practitioner with the
Yeah.
Institute of the Future.
Yes.
That's pretty
Isn't that
fancy.
fun? Yeah.
Is it fun?
Oh gosh, yes. It is. It's absolutely wonderful. Yeah. Because you just unlock people's ideas and it's fascinating about what the future might hold.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Hey, well, look, I'm here today to unlock your ideas and particularly talk about what the future might hold for organizational culture. Now, a lot of people probably think they know what it is, or they've heard the term and they go,
Mm,
"Oh, is it that?" From a
mm.
basic level, when I say organizational culture, what do you say?
I say organizational values and culture are the same thing. And there are, you're right, a lot of definitions out there. And the one I like best is they are your attitudes, mindsets, and beliefs that determine how you go about delivering your product or service or whatever your entity does. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm assuming, people bring their own to work. When
Yeah.
we look at it from a bigger spectrum, how do those two things, that the individual and
Yeah.
the organization, how do they come together?
It's such a good question. So the individual has their own personal values about what are important to them. And they do change over time as your life changes. However, there will always be some intrinsic things that you hold dear to your heart. And your organizational values need to actually align with your personal values, or you will not be happy at work. So there is that aspect of it. Um, and we know that the young ones today are much more purpose led and values driven. And so their personal values and that alignment is even more important than perhaps people of my generation, where we just had to park that and pop it in a pocket and keep working, you know. So the whole makeup of workforce and the whole makeup of what intrinsically motivates people has changed. And that's important for so many reasons.
I guess there's a sense of, that organizational culture is how you behave at work, and there perhaps in the past is an expectation that you come to work and you just fit into the way that things are done here. And as you
Yes.
say, you leave yourself behind. Is it really, it's obviously about how people behave at work,
Yeah.
but as an organization, you go, this is who we are and this is how we want to behave. Or indeed, do organizations sometimes not even know that? Do they not know what their organizational culture is? They just
Yeah.
do their
So
thing.
sometimes they don't. I would say, 20 years ago, it was much more of an implicit thing. I think that it's more explicit now, and organizations recognize that, the whole Peter Drucker concept of culture eats strategy for breakfast, which was around in the 1990s and so on. I mean, that became a little bit more to the fore. And so organizations did start to think about it more. But it's much more than just how you behave. So if you've got good values that are aligned to your strategy, then they drive decision making as well. And so, if you're sitting on a board, you get papers that come to you that not only identify what it is they want you to make a decision on and the impact of that decision on your risk profile and so on, but it should also actually say, okay, so is this decision aligned with what we say our values are? So it's much
Yeah.
more layered than merely behavior. Yeah.
Yeah. When it comes to defining those values, who determines what the organization's culture should, can't simply be a top-down kind of thing.
No, it can't be top down, but it has to be led by the board. The board, if we think about what is the role of a board, then the role of a board is to lead the development of strategy, and that is very clearly around the purpose of the organisation, along with your culture and your strategic priorities. And if we think about the Institute of Directors, they have a 4-pillar model that they use to determine the purpose of a board. And the first pillar is around determining purpose, and the second pillar is around setting the tone from the top around culture. And so it has to be led from the top. And so in terms of who identifies the organizational values, I embed that into my strategy and foresight workshops, because in that we talk about risk, opportunity, and the values of the organization need to enable you to harness your opportunities and avoid or mitigate your risk. That said, it cannot solely be top down. So there has to be a process that comes in behind that actually says, well, these are the sorts of things that are really important from a cultural perspective. Let's go and talk to our staff and finesse and prioritize, and also take a step back and make sure that there's nothing else that we actually really desperately need that we might have missed. So, you know, it has to be all encompassing. Yeah.
At what point should that sort of interaction occur? Because I guess there might be people who think, oh gosh, I don't really know that we've got an organizational culture strategy. We're going to put one together, or they're looking to redefine what it is and see if it's for purpose. When the board is sitting there and thinking, oh, we should really crack on with this, at what point should they start to involve staff so that people in the organization feel they have an input, rather than simply having it come to them either slightly too late, fait accompli, or indeed too early, and they go, we don't really know what you're talking about?
Yeah, look, that's such a good point. And so that's why it's part of the strategy setting. So you can't identify your culture if you don't know what your strategy is. So if you've got your strategy, hopefully you've got some process for engaging staff on what you see as your strategy. And so it needs to happen at the point that you're actually starting to work out what it is that you're doing, why you're doing it, and how you're doing it. So all of those things come together. And so for me, it's very much about the board says, okay, here's a whole lot of things that we think are critical for us to achieve our strategy from a cultural perspective. And there's you know, a very large framework. Let's go and talk to staff with this within the context of the strategy. So that's the umbrella. And this is actually a wonderful way to have a conversation with staff to say, well, we want to make sure you know why you're doing what you're doing and how we measure success of the business. So it's very important it's done early enough, and it's not a fait accompli. So it's not consultation. It's not saying, well, this is what we think they are, you tell us what you think. It's saying, here's a whole lot of ideas, and it's how you present those.
Yeah. And I'm sitting here thinking, as someone who doesn't know a lot about it, what are we actually talking about when it comes to that? What are the little examples of this that make an organization's culture?
Yeah.
You know, is it returning a phone call on time? Is it being really proactive? What are the little tangible things that you quite often see businesses talking about, or indeed failing to talk about?
That's a good question, and it's very much about what is the organization for, and so and what are the things that the organization is facing. So I've recently done this with an electricity distribution business, and of course we've got so much change happening in that sector, so many challenges, and so for this organization there were so many things that they needed to be thinking about from a cultural perspective. And so the things they were thinking about were things like thinking outside the square. So that's around, you know, your innovation and creativity. They were thinking about valuing their people, because they've got workforce issues in terms of making sure they have the capability that they need to deliver on their strategy. They had things like stakeholder engagement, because they had a wealth of different stakeholders, and because of where they were situated, they had stakeholders or customers that were not merely households. So they had a lot of big business that they needed to think about how they were going to keep the power on, how they were going to keep the manufacturing happening and so on. So it's really about, well, why are these things important? And saying, okay, we might give it a title, and that title has to have meaning to everyone in the business. And we have to say why it's important to the business. And then if you need more flesh on the bone, then talking to staff about, well, what do you think you'd see someone doing if they were actually demonstrating this within this context? And
we took it to sort of the other end, because I can see a huge organization like that, going through this process. Say I'm at the other end of that electricity network. I run a business with a whole lot of Sparkies going around and doing installs and things like that. What might my conversation with them and the workshop people and the receptionist, what might that be?
well, again, it's talking about it at the point that makes sense for the individual. So if you're somebody who's out there fixing lines, or out there working on someone's property, then a lot of it is around customer service. So you might have one that is around the importance of how you interact with your customers. If it's around how you interact with other people in your organization, then you might have something about, valuing each other, or teamwork or something. But again, it's about making it really clear why it's important for your business, and and why it's important for them to know what's expected, because that's part of it, isn't it? If you know what's expected of you, then you can be much more successful than if you're floundering around trying to learn by osmosis. What does this company like?
Yeah, exactly. And you're working for one company and you come to another one who's got very different expectations from the moment you take a phone call to the moment that invoice is sent out at the end. How do I know if I'm an organization? How do I know if I've got the right culture?
That's a really interesting question, because a lot of the time what I'm doing is going in because boards or chief executives are saying there's something not right here, we're not actually delivering, and we've got issues. And so really quickly if you've got issues, because you've got exit interview data that has been gathered in a valid way that's telling you that people are not happy and that's why they're leaving, and they will tell you why they're leaving. So there's those sorts of things that actually provide you with that. There's engagement surveys, and it's unfortunate, but a lot of the time when I'm going into organizations and I say, so what data do you have? They just give me an engagement survey as if that's telling me about the culture, but it isn't. You might have media that's telling you that things aren't right. You might have been making decisions about sponsoring, like if you have sponsorship deals, you might be making decisions on who you're going to sponsor, and your criteria is out of alignment with your values. Investment decisions, you might be investing in the wrong things. So your chief executive might send out weekly pānia or weekly newsletter, and the whole tone of it is out of alignment. And the thing is that the staff see it immediately. Immediately they see it. It's like a sore thumb, and the cynicism becomes rife. Here's this organization saying this is important, and a manager's doing something quite different.
Yeah. And a lot of those optics and things are really important as well. What do you offer examples of organizations that have a very good informal culture? It's just become a part of who they are. And
Yeah.
then, someone's come in, new board members or something, go, we need to structure this, we need to write it down, and it's these points here. And they actually get a little bit lost in it and maybe regress, or something doesn't quite fit.
Yeah. It's one of those things where if an organization is small enough to actually be able to do business over the water cooler sort of thing, then it's very easy to pick up on what a culture is, and for it to feel, warm, and you feel a huge sense of belonging. Yeah. And then somebody comes in and tries to put a structure around it, and it breaks it.
Yeah.
So it's critical that in those situations, that the process by which you formalize that is aligned to the culture that you have.
Yeah.
And so that's about going and talking to people and saying, you know, it seems like things are really important, like this, and this, you know, and that's how you do things. Is that what you think? And actually getting them to build up what they believe it is, if it's a really good culture and it's not broken, and then look at that and say, well, we can see how that culture is actually delivering our strategy because our risks are this and our opportunities are this, and that's perfectly aligned. But what about if we add this up? You know, so
Yeah.
it's so
Yeah.
much about how you do things and how you engage people and how you make them part of it, you know,
Yeah.
but
Have you
always
seen
linking it
the
to strategy.
Yeah. And have you seen the importance of it rise? You know, you've been doing this for 30 years, you know, and you've got boards that share prices and dividends and profitability. They're all there because, you know, without those, the company can't go on. But have you seen this sort of, I
Yeah,
guess, the rise of this importance of organizational
yeah.
culture within businesses, large and small?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when I started out, nobody really gave a toss about culture as such. You know, it was that thing of something warm and fuzzy that HR does. But I think the change happened. Well, the thing that really stands out for me is three things happened. We had in 2018 Larry Fink, who was head of BlackRock, which is one of the largest investment houses in the world, sends a letter out every year to the chief executives that their company invests in. And in 2018, he sent his letter out, and he talked about the fact that investors were no longer investing um, in companies solely on the basis of profitability and share price. They were investing on the basis of environmental performance, social performance, which is not just about how you live within the community, but also how you treat and develop your staff and how well your governors perform. And so that was one really strong signal to boards to start thinking broader than balance sheet. And then we had in 2017, we had the Reserve Bank of New Zealand do a review where they came out and said boards need to be thinking and monitoring culture. And then in, I think it was 2018, there was a Royal Commission in Australia into finance superannuation and banking. And in there, they explicitly said that it is no longer sufficient for boards to be looking at what the employee does. They need to now be considering how they do their jobs as well. And that
Yeah.
just signaled to boards, okay, we have to care about this stuff. And it's continuing now, Rada. So we've got
Yeah.
in the 2023 sentiment survey done by the IOD, they've got the biggest issue facing the companies of over 20% of the directors who responded. It was about workforce capability and capacity. And and that's a cultural issue because we, as we said earlier, you know, employees, the young ones coming in, they don't want to work for organizations that aren't purpose-led and values-driven. And so if you've got problems around workforce, you need to be thinking about culture.
Yeah.
So
And it
those
has to
things
be,
really changed.
yeah.
So
And it has to be more than just a tick box thing. You know, it's got to be, you know, when we say it's got to be lived within the organization, what does that mean?
well, you know, back in the 1980s when I started out, yes, we used to just have posters and have the values and we used to stick them on the walls. See, that's what we have to do. But that's where that alignment comes in. And so that's where you actually are saying, okay, any organization has a whole number of facets to it. And those facets are around its operating model, how it's structured, and the accountabilities and delegations. It's how you communicate, how you train people, your systems. You know, do you reward people on just the what they do, according to the Royal Commission? No, you need to actually reward them for both what and how.
Yeah.
So the systems, it's your brand, and we've got ideas, haven't we? Or examples rather of um, way back in like the mid 20s, 2015 and so on, of organisations that actually tripped up, where they were saying they were doing one thing and then actually they were doing something else, like Volkswagen when they did that. Do you remember that, where they did the
Yes, yes, I
emissions?
do. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Huge.
that's a perfect
Yeah.
example of culture disconnect, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that whole thing, yeah.
Over the many years that you've been doing this, can you think of any I guess, really good sentiments that have been put down on a piece of paper, or something where you've just gone, you've looked at an organization and you've gone, what a great little thing they've added in there, or what a great little thing they've recognized they need to add in to, I guess, to the formal nature of their sort of cultural
There's
organization document.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say this. So Tina, please feel free to edit it out. But one of the things that I always use as an example that is just so simple and so easy, and I'm pretty sure it's Trade Me. They have a value around don't be a dick.
Yeah,
I mean, isn't that perfect?
yeah. And it's
It's
really simple
little,
because actually, you probably couldn't do that in America, but here
no,
in New Zealand, you know, at no matter what level of the company you are, if you think to yourself, am I am I being a dick? You know, it's a really good little handbrake, isn't it? And
yeah,
it's both formal and
yes,
radically informal. But
yeah,
again, that's part of the organization of that particular company's culture, and arguably that kind of wider sense of what New Zealand companies are kind of like.
yeah,
We're a little bit more informal in our
yeah,
culture, do you think, than say certainly America and
yeah.
other companies?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah,
And it's all because it's aligned to the culture of being a Kiwi. It's aligned to
yeah.
our Aotearoa. And I mean the other thing that I'm seeing too is a number of organizations using, Māori labels for their values, like manaakitanga and so on. And I think that you have to be very careful about what you're doing there. And so there's a part of me that says, well, that's lovely that we're embracing that. There's another part of me that says we've got to be careful about cultural appropriation. And so, you just need to be very considered in how you do those sorts of things as well.
Yes, absolutely. And I'll tell you what, Lynda, if people want to pop back in the archives of HR chats, we've got a few podcasts that really do deal with the importance of the kind of appropriation and how you bring those on. But it is interesting, isn't it? The likes of Manaki Tano. It's a wonderful word that covers so much kind of things. And if it's
Yeah.
brought in a really open and transparent and an appropriate kind of manner, it does cover a lot of stuff just with a simple word.
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah,
it does.
brilliant.
Yeah.
Um, for someone who's listening to this and thinking, gosh, I'm going to pop in and see my organizational document to see whether, what we've got noted down for culture and whether we're, you know, hitting all the marks, what would you say to them? What's the most important thing that someone can do at the end of this to think about their organizational culture?
For me, it is two things. One is absolutely explicitly link it to your strategy. There's lots of well-intentioned people who go out and just talk to staff, but they don't link it to their strategy. So number one, link it to your strategy. And I've just forgotten what I was. Oh, and number two is make sure that it's clear. Make it absolutely explicit in terms of what you mean and why it's important.
Yeah. Brilliant, because these things can become a little highfalutin at times, and then in the end, nobody knows what they mean.
No,
But it's
and
got to be, it's got to be real, and it's got to
yes,
be lived. Yeah,
yes, for everyone.
great, brilliant. All right, thank you so much, Lynda Carroll. For those of you who want to know more about that, I'm sure you can find some of her webinars and various other things. Could we see them online, Linda, if they want to find out more?
Yes, and there's blog posts from a line group that talk about culture in various settings, and yeah.
Brilliant. So a little bit of,
Okay.
I guess, what extra for experts, for people who want to delve a little bit deeper into this. And as I mentioned,
Okay.
we have no shortage of material in our archives that cover a whole lot of things HR and HR related. So feel free to dive back into the archives and catch up on anything you have not caught up on, or indeed refresh yourself with things that you have seen or heard up until now. For now, a massive thanks to Lynda Carroll from Align Group. That's all from me to Radar on this episode of HR Chats.